Paul, what do you see as the positives out of Donald Trump's second term in presidency so far?
Boy, it is really hard, honestly. I think the positives will be in the reaction to the things that he's done. My hope is that the public has been given the government they chose. Nothing that Trump is doing was outside of what he was signaling and overtly saying he was going to do. The majority of the country, or at least the plurality of the country, voted for this. They're getting it good and hard. I do, in the end, believe in the wisdom of the voters, but they have to feel the effects. And if the effects are what I think they're going to be, and they're not going to be good, you could have a resurgence in this country of a belief that a well-funded, well-managed government is important, that a well-managed set of alliances is important, and we could find ourselves in a better new era, one that we've not felt, certainly in my professional lifetime, when the two parties were at such loggerheads.
The thing is that even if it was a close election, people still voted Donald Trump in.
Yes.
And those who support him often say, well, what makes him different from a regular politician, some don't see him as a politician, is that he at least does what, as you just indicated, he does what he said he would.
Well, honestly, all presidents do. If you look at the literature on presidential promise keeping, presidents work very hard to pass the legislation and do the executive orders that they said they were going to do on the campaign trail. I think what makes Donald Trump different, a lot makes Donald Trump different, is I think people really do think he speaks his mind. And he honestly says things that you're not supposed to say, and people love that.
Now, you knew a very different Democratic Party, especially your time working during, with the White House and President Clinton. But of course, there was a lot before that too, in terms of the way the Democratic Party was different. Many commentators wonder if there are any viable figures left in the Democratic Party now to stir up the voters. It seems that it's really missing the kind of charisma it needs to present a real challenge to the Republicans. How do you see that?
Well, there's some very good talent out there in the Democratic Party. I worked for one of the great talents of all time, Bill Clinton. And he was followed by another once-in-a-lifetime talent, Barack Obama. The question is, and it required talent of that level for the Democrats to win. It did not require talent at that level for the Republicans to win. They made it with George W. Bush, who had neither the verbal skills nor the policy understanding of Obama and Clinton, or Donald Trump. So the question is there once in a lifetime levels of talent out there? I don't see it, but there's some good people.
Just give me, so I have a perspective on why you feel Bill Clinton and perhaps Barack Obama were talented.
First of all, they had a feel for average Americans because they were. They had come from humble backgrounds. Two, they managed to present themselves as presidents for the whole country, even if half of the country didn't see it that way. But they certainly tried. Three, especially Bill Clinton, was a policy genius and entrepreneur. And a political genius who could move the puzzle pieces of policy ideas around in his mind, tweak them, put them together in a governing vision. And even people who didn't necessarily understand all the policies could feel the power and integrity of what it was, that it was something new, something different, something better. And I think Obama had a little bit of that too. I don't see that. I haven't seen that for a while. And that's what Democrats need to figure out.
One more thought on the Democrats. There was all kinds of reasons why, given by people, analysts, on why Kamala Harris didn't really make it. as that people predicted she might. What did you think was wrong? Was it that America was not ready for a woman, perhaps not a woman of color? What was the reason that she didn't really click with me?
Yes and yes. I think that was an uphill battle. I think she ran a great campaign. I can barely fault her. She had a bad hand coming in. It was very last minute. I think she did remarkably well. She is not a policy person. Big ideas, vision, that's not her thing. Not that she's not fluent in it, it's just not her first instinct or first love. And I think she struggled a little bit to present. There is no vision without the right policy background, building blocks. And she had pieces of them, but it didn't develop into, and again, she was hampered by the fact that she was so closely tied to an administration whose leader was so old and was coming off such a tough period.
When do you think America would be ready for a woman president? Hollywood has them all the time now.
Yeah, yeah. I think we're on the verge. It could happen at any time. I don't think it's unreasonable to, but we might not be there yet.
Especially, a lot of people would say because of Trump having so many supporters visible now, and they wouldn't be the kind that would want a woman president.
Well, those supporters are not going to vote for a Democrat, so that's not.
It could be either side. I mean, Republican.
Yeah, correct. Boy, it's a lot harder to see the Republicans supporting for a woman getting through the Republican primaries than a woman getting through the Democratic primaries. That's for sure.
It's interesting, comedian Zach Galifianakis did a satirical interview with Barack Obama in which he started by asking, what's it like to be the last black president? When do you think America would be ready for another president of ethnic minority color, whatever it would be?
Oh, I think they're ready now. I don't read race into the choices that Americans make to the extent that some others read that. I think it's there. Even for voters who have racial animus and who are voting based on race, they hate to be called out on it. And they don't want to think of themselves that way. And, it's fighting words in this point in our country to call somebody racist. That wasn't the case when I was growing up. People were open racists. So, it's a big deal. I think Barack Obama shows it's a deal that can be overcome. And I think we're going to see that with a woman, and I think we're going to see that maybe with a Pakistani American.
Okay, let's see. Yes, you're talking now about New York.
Yes, and I'm also talking about Riz Khan, another very impressive young Pakistani intellectual who ran the Federal Trade Commission and was there when Mamdani won the race.
Let me get you to put on your journalistic hat now, Paul, and ask how you regard the way the current administration treats the media. What's your perspective on that?
Again, never seen anything like it. Openly giving preferences to openly right-wing outlets and openly transactionally trying to limit what mainstream journalists can say and do by, challenging the regulations and other activities that affect their corporations. It's really the kinds of things you see in autocracies like Russia, Turkey, et cetera. We've never seen anything like it in the United States.
Yet now we have social media, which is a little more independent and outside the control of big institutions, the government included to some degree. What impact could that have going down the road?
Well, it may be in some ways outside the direct control of the federal government, but it's also under the thumb of oligarchs, right? And those oligarchs need the federal government. So really, in Trump's view, nothing should be outside his power. And he has been remarkable in finding in utilizing powers that no other president would have used because it's evil, right, and anti-democratic, he's using them. And so, Katie barred the door. We don't know where this ends.
There are regular stories of journalists being targeted for saying something negative about the administration or the president directly himself. What does that say about the state of freedom of speech in the USA now?
Again, other presidents, look, I was in the Clinton administration during the Monica Lewinsky period. Believe me, the colleagues that I worked with and the president himself did not hold the media in high regard, did not think they were being truthful, did not think they were being fair, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Sorry, an aside, were you asked to advise on that, what Bill Clinton should say?
Fortunately not. Fortunately not. That was all siloed in the legal department, and the rest of us were free to do the business of the people. But never in a million years would the Clinton administration, or really any administration, countenance the vindictiveness, the retribution, the targeting of individual journalists, the targeting of individual news outlets that we're seeing today.
Have you, as a Washington journalist, someone who's been an insider for a long time, have you had any sense of being able to speak freely now, or do you feel you are at risk?
Fortunately, I don't. I have a very small magazine. We don't have any direct funding from either government, or corporations that are being affected by government. We speak our minds, and we are a magazine that is an opinion-driven, investigative magazine. So we can be open with what we think, as I have been with you in this interview.
Sure.
The demands on other mainstream organizations of presenting the facts and not presenting their own opinions and their own analysis. For those folks who do a remarkable job, my greatest admiration. I don't know how they managed to do it.
I should, by the way, just point out, it's interesting for me to learn that you were an unpaid intern at the Washington Monthly many, many years ago, and then finally end up as editor-in-chief there.
Yeah.
For over 2 decades.
No, and for that reason, I resisted ever paying our interns until I had a rebellion on my hands from my colleagues, and now we pay them reasonably well.
But when you became editor, I think 2001, editor-in-chief.
Correct.
Yeah? It was a very different time, wasn't it?
Yes. It seemed difficult and dark at the time. We had an administration, George W. Bush, that was breaking new ground in dissembling and policy amateurishness. And yet we look back on it now, and it's kind of golden age of Republican, administrations compared to where we're at today. But all of the underlying forces that we're seeing in full bloom today were moving in this direction back then. And what we didn't know is the degree to which they would become in full bloom.
Perhaps the speed.
And the speed. It hasn't taken very long. I've been doing this for 24 years, and I thought there would be at some point a reverse reaction among the Republican base and Republican lawmakers. And you saw that almost happen in the Bush years, but it was overwhelmed. And the sort of isolationism that Pat Buchanan tapped early, the anti-immigrant passions that Donald Trump tapped, the shift among Republicans toward the non-college educated voter, and the movement of college educated voters to the Democratic Party that was already beginning to happen in the 90s. Now it's in full fruition. It's almost as if you have two different parties representing two different Americas.
So, Paul, overall, if you were to assess the state of the US media now, what condition is it in?
Well, economically, it is in terrible shape. The capacities of journalistic outlets to raise the money, the profits, the revenues that they need to do their jobs has just been declining especially at the local level, but even at the national level, for many years, largely as a result of a combination of technology and monopoly, right? You have Google and other, but primarily Google, Facebook somewhat, Amazon somewhat, taking the advertising revenues that used to support journalism and hoarding them through their monopoly power. And you've seen now Google, the federal courts have determined Google broke the law in monopolizing the ad technology, and we'll see where that leads. But it leaves most journalistic outlets scrambling to raise money, scrambling to find audiences. And it's remarkable to me that we're seeing journalism of the quality we're seeing in such an impoverished environment.
So now, Paul, I'm going to turn to a time when you had a lot of responsibility, a very interesting and important time in your life, of course, when you were a speechwriter for Bill Clinton. And I want to touch on this because it's nice to get the insider perspective. And I wonder, here you are, you're responsible for the words that come out of the president's mouth. What sort of burden, what sort of stress does that put on you as a speechwriter for the president? And, how stressful is that position when you know what they're going to say is what you wrote?
It is a stressful position. It is requires an immense amount of hours, an immense focus. I've never felt that stress that I did in those 2.5 years. Fortunately, you're not doing it alone. You're part of a team. I was one of 6 to 8 speechwriters who divided up the work. We were working with the senior advisors to the president. We were circulating the speeches with those folks, getting input from those folks. So you had a net under you. And of course, President Clinton famously was his own author and would not be afraid to chop your text into pieces and write his own words on the margins. And
but collaboratively, I presume.
Sometimes, sometimes, he was giving, when I was there, 2 or 3 addresses, speeches, press hits a day. So often he would have the text in front of him a few hours before he had to go in front of the cameras. But it was enough time for him to sit there and fiddle with it. And, he, like many good politicians, can extemporize. There's a famous story about Bill Clinton in his first State of the Union address being fed the wrong version of the speech, recognizing that, and while the correct version was being fed into the teleprompter, not missing a beat because he was able to remember what it was he was supposed to say.
Presumably, as a speechwriter for president, you have to, and it will take time, learn what the strengths and weaknesses are when it comes to, A, the way you phrase things. I mean, I know this, if ever I have to take as a news reader, for example, when I was doing that rather than a show host, I would have to see words often quite last minute. But also the style of writing would be important. So I guess you have to kind of get in the flow with the person you're writing for.
You do. And, with Bill Clinton, he was famously a vernacular speaker. He didn't want to sound like John Kennedy. He didn't want to sound like Abraham Lincoln. He wanted to sound like the Arkansan, speaking to the folks that he grew up with. So our job was to lean a little bit in the other direction, to make him sound a little bit more presidential. And that was the kind of the tension that made his speeches good, because he would add, we never wrote in that vernacular. We wrote presidential addresses, and he would folksy them up to the extent that he thought that was necessary.
Interesting. So you got the folksy perspective in as well.
Yes.
Which probably made him more charming to a lot of people as well.
Absolutely. And he is has one of the finest political ears in the country.
What was the hardest thing about the job, Paul?
Keeping up with the pace. You were writing 2 or 3 of these a week, and sometimes they were large and required multiple revisions. But honestly, I can't complain. It was one of the greatest experiences anyone who makes his or her living with a pen can possibly have. And I felt privileged every day to go into that building and do that work.
And it's a 24/7 job, really, because the president's all over the world.
That's right. That's right. And we all had pagers on our belts that we kept by our beds at night. And it didn't happen too often to me that the pager would go off in the middle of the night, but you knew you were on the hook for that. And it was just a remarkable group of people.
In your opinion, who was the best speech giver, if you like, of the presidents? If you ever look back and looked at them,
obviously Kennedy, obviously Reagan.
What was it about Reagan? Because again, people often refer back to him.
Reagan was a remarkably good writer, and liberals at the time couldn't imagine it because they thought he was dumb.
Right.
But he understood his own philosophy, and he understood rhetoric. He had very good people working for him. And when we would write speeches for Bill Clinton, one of the things we would do was go back and look at previous presidents' speeches on that subject, be it the economy or education or whatever. And more often than not, we would steal from Ronald Reagan.
And Ronald Reagan was a big joke teller, too.
Fantastic joke teller. And Bill Clinton, I think, has to be in the pantheon of great speech givers. But because of that vernacular tendency of his, when you read the speeches that were given, they don't quite have the same lift. But at the time, they were extremely powerful.
So what you're saying is that if you read them on paper, they don't have the same impact because he delivered the words in such a way that when you actually saw them live, they were different.
He was almost allergic to highfalutin sounding phraseology. Ask not what your country can do for you. That just was not his style. He wanted to talk the way folks talked. And so the ideas were important, the rhetoric was brilliant, the examples were great, but you're not going to chisel them in marble the way you did Abraham Lincoln.
What were the best moments for you during that time?
My favorite moments were being there, seeing him give the State of the Union and waiting for my little couple of paragraphs to show up. I wrote a speech for him that he delivered on the state of democracy in Athens in 1999 that I'm still very proud of. And, my heritage is Greek and I have family there. So I got to write the speech and then watch it right there in Greece with my family. That was pretty special.
Can you recall a favorite phrase that you put in one of your speeches that made it to the international airwaves?
I did have a phrase in that speech and it was written for the Greek audience. And it was something like, none of us can escape the weight of history, but neither should we feel imprisoned by it. Okay. And my colleagues wanted the speech to be how we shouldn't worry about history. And I said, you're speaking to Greeks. Every time they turn the corner in Athens, there's the Parthenon. They cannot escape history, their history. So but they need not be imprisoned by it.
You didn't sneak in the beware of Trojans bearing gifts.
I did get one quote from Demosthenes. I was pleased with that, and Pericles.
It's interesting because the way a president comes across, the words you write included, set the sort of the image of America for people. People watch this and it's the charisma or it's the way the words come across. It is quite a big responsibility that way because you affect how the country, the USA, is seen.
Absolutely. In that speech that I was telling you about that President Clinton gave in Athens in 1999, the key point in the speech was him offering a non-apology apology from U.S. support for the Greek junta that took over Greece from 1967 to 1974, I believe. At that time, the Greeks were very angry at Bill Clinton and very angry at the United States because of our support for the fighting of the Serbs in Bosnia. When he offered those few sentences where he said America failed in its obligation to support democracy in Greece, you could see the polling in Greece shift dramatically in a matter of hours. And ever since that speech, you've seen a decrease in Greek anti-Americanism and greater support for the United States. That's the power of good rhetoric.
That's quite remarkable. And presumably also, when you do have to deal with subtle stuff like this, the difficult stuff, you have to be able to phrase it in such a way that a president can say it without perhaps giving an outright apology, for example.
Right.
Without having to commit themselves to a particular agenda or policy.
Correct. And that, you know, those lines in the speech had nothing to do with me. That was future Secretary of State Tony Blinken and several others in the administration carefully crafted that language so that it could not be said to have been an outright apology, but no Greek could miss the implication. And that is the art of diplomacy.
You know, Paul, it's funny, when I moved to the USA, when I left the BBC and joined CNN in 1993, one of the biggest shocks for me was moving from Britain, which, you know, had an empire, you know, the sun never set on, and coming to America and suddenly seeing the UK through the eyes of the outside world, in particular Americans. And it sounds terrible, but it sort of felt diminished. Britain, I was not living there anymore, no longer felt as important in the world. Now, I know you spent time as bureau chief in Berlin. You were covering the former Yugoslav war and so on. How did that change your perspective on how America was seen?
Well, it was almost the opposite. When I was reporting from Berlin, it was hard to sell stories about Europe to a U.S. audience because, again, this was the 90s. America was at maybe its peak of influence, and it felt, why should we listen at all to the outside world? And there was a certain sense, you know, in Europe of a malaise. They had been unable to handle the war in Bosnia. The U.S. had to come in and more or less orchestrate the NATO involvement, which did in the end bring peace to the region. One, as a foreign correspondent at that point, got an almost, you know, sense of the vast superiority in power and prestige of the United States.
How have things changed in the 30 years since?
Well, you being, you know, much more the globetrotter than I, you are in a better position to tell. I would be curious what you think, but you know, my sense is that the world still pays minute attention to what happens in the United States, and that there is still tremendous yearning in many parts of the world for the benign leadership that from time to time, at its best, the United States has provided.
You think that'll come around again?
Yes.
Let me ask you as a final thought, Paul, how do you think history will regard this time? You know, especially now since the second Trump presidency and how the world has kind of shifted under it.
Boy, that's such a hard question. None of us know the answer. That's for sure. I know what I want the answer to be, and I think I can make a plausible case that it will be. And that is, it was a time, you know, Winston Churchill famously said, America will do the right thing after exhausting all other possibilities. Yeah. We're in the exhausting all other possibilities phase. Right. We're saying to ourselves, we can live without investing in our alliances. We can degrade our friendships. We can exploit the world and pay no price. We can gut the government, gut it of expertise, gut our universities, and pay no price. I think we're going to pay a price. And I think that might just change opinion for the better.
Well, Paul, let's make sure we come back and talk again about this.
I'd love to. Let's see if I'm right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
You. Paul Glastris, the editor-in-chief of the Washington Monthly and very much a DC insider, giving us a view through his lens on the US and its current policies. That's it for now. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment, and I'll see you next time.